Thank you so much. You can hear me okay? Okay, awesome. Yeah, thank you so much for having me back. I think some of you might have seen me speak last year, but if not, I'll kind of reintroduce myself. So yeah, I'm a PhD student. My background is in soil extension. So I was the extension specialist for agriculture for a few years, but prior to that, I worked with the Department of Natural Resources as a summer student and did my earlier research in forestry, working with forest liming at the Otter Ponds Demonstration Forest. So I'm excited to talk to you again about the ForestSHARE project because we're about a year and a half in right now. So I'm going to go over the project briefly and then talk about some updates because we do have some new and exciting changes to the project that I think will be of interest. And I'm going to try and keep it to 15-20 minutes so we have lots of time for questions at the end. So before I get going into the details of the project, I just kind of want to highlight some of our project partners. So Murray A. Reeves Forestry, Debbie Reeves is one of the co-leads on the project, as well as Kevin Keys, I am the Family Forest Network, our partners on the project. And then we're working with the Dalhousie Center for Sustainable Soil Management, that's where I'm housed. And the Department of Microbiology and Immunology focus on the microbiology part. And then we're also partnered with the Department of Natural Resources, NSCC, and Genome Atlantic. So we have lots of partners on this project. So the project background, so this is our new logo. So if you see that or hear ForestSHARE, it's always in reference to this project. And really what we're trying to do is establish a comprehensive benchmark for forest soil data in Nova Scotia and look at soil health more in depth and identify these indicators for soil health. And I will talk a little bit about soil health and what it looks like in forest systems. And then we want to use these soil health indicators to develop management interpretations. So similar to something like we have in agriculture where we have an extension program, we want to collect the information we need to develop a soil health extension program for forests in Nova Scotia. So these are these overarching goals. Oh no. I wasn't as patient as you told me to be. So the next slide is how are we going to achieve these goals? It'll pop up in a second. So really what we need is we need this baseline information. So we're collecting hundreds of samples across the province in different forest and soil types, trying to capture what is actually happening in our soil. Because we can't really make recommendations before we know what's there. And then I'm also looking at conducting a comprehensive literature review. So this is part of the PhD project where I'm looking at temperate forests around the world and looking at what soil health indicators they use and how they interpret that into management applications. So once we collect these samples and look at the literature, we're trying to evaluate which soil health properties are most important. So when we think about soil health, it's there's not just one single measurement. So similar to human health, if you go to the doctor and you have a broken arm and they're like, well, the only thing we measure for health is cholesterol. Your cholesterol's fine. Well, you're not necessarily healthy. So same with soil, there's a ton of physical, biological, and chemical properties that you can measure, but there are dozens and dozens of them, so it's not feasible to measure all of them. So we're trying to identify which ones are the most important for your specific forest. And then the other thing that, so I have two little stars there next to this, is that we're actually looking at recent forest fires this year. So this is a new addition to the project that I didn't talk about last year because we kind of have the opportunity to go look at some of these forest fire sites and see what's happening to those soil health properties. So in general, there is no universal definition for soil health because their soil health can look different for different ecosystems. In a agriculture ecosystem, or even in a sugar maple stand versus like a black spruce stand, your soil health is going to look differently. And these are just some of the properties that we're going to be measuring. But in general, we need the soil to sustain biological productivity, environmental quality, and plant, animal, and human health. So, once the next slide comes up. Oh. So, what we're doing with this project, we did still skip a few slides. Oh my goodness. There we go. So I kind of went through all of this, but this is just some examples of some forest soils here in Nova Scotia. So we will be collecting samples all across the province, and we're going to be measuring a ton of different indicators. And then evaluate which ones are most useful. And then the next step of what we're doing is defining those benchmark ranges. So we've identified which indicators are most useful, but then we need to know within what range do we consider these soils healthy or not. Because again, they're, what health looks like for, say, a 24-year-old running a marathon versus somebody in their 80s is going to look different. Same for your forest. If you have different forest types, your pH range, your nutrient range of what's considered healthy might be different. So we're really trying to capture these different ecosites, different forest types, and identify these ranges with the end goal of you can go collect a soil sample at the end of this project and say, okay, I'm within the reasonable range or I'm outside of the reasonable range for these different soil properties. So we are trying to collect 650 different sites, 1,300 samples total. So we're collecting 2 soil samples at each site, typically a forest floor horizon and then a bee horizon. Depending on the type of forest, we might also collect an AH horizon, so an upper, more rich soil mineral horizon. And all of these sites are randomly selected. So we're using some sites that have been collected on Crown land, but this project is specifically looking at private woodlots. So to appease the stats gods, as we say, we do have to randomly select them. And so if you do receive a letter saying from ForestSHARE that we want to come collect a sample, that's us. Or if you have a neighbor that is, okay, we got this random letter from these people, what does this mean? And the amount of soil that we're collecting is approximately 4 to 5 cups using an auger. So it's very non-invasive sampling, and so you'll get contacted by a sampler, and they'll come. It takes a couple hours, and then you also will eventually get those results. But those results will go into kind of a greater data set, so it won't be, all the information is private. The only other thing we might ask is, we might ask for some background information just about the site, if you know that the harvest history or something around the site. So this is what this looks like. So each one of these different colors is a different ecosite, and this also is changing. Sometimes we don't get permission to go sample. Sometimes the site that we're looking for doesn't exactly meet the conditions we're looking for. So this is changing, but I just kind of wanted to give you an example of what the sample locations look like throughout the province. When we go out, we're looking for specific ecosite conditions because we're trying to capture all of these different forest and soil types. We determine that it's the right ecosite based on the forest ecosystem classification, determine the sample horizons, collect the samples, and then deliver them to the lab. And in the lab, these are just some of the properties that are being measured. So we're looking at pH and exchangeable acidity, which is really important for Nova Scotia because we typically have acidic soils. The nutrient content, organic matter, carbon, cation exchange capacity, base saturation, texture, bulk density, aggregate stability. These are just some of the measurements. And then we are also looking at the forest floor microbiome. So that's what we're doing in partnership with the microbiology lab out of Dalhousie in Halifax. So identifying different bacteria and fungi groups. I want to click it again, but so the next stage of what we're doing, so once we collect all these samples, we are then trying to put those into management interpretations. This starting next week, we're going to be out sampling for the rest of the summer. And last year we did collect some samples, but unfortunately because of the drought, we got a lot fewer than we were hoping for. So we do have a bigger team of samplers this year to try and catch up. And we are hoping for collecting about 300 sample sites this year. Right now we have 150 lined up because that's what we have permission for. And so same thing, just if you know someone that's been contacted, encourage them to say yes to us and please let us come take a soil sample. So the next thing I want to talk about is the forest fire sampling that we're looking at, because sometimes it is difficult to identify whether the soil is healthy, but we can determine sometimes when the soil is unhealthy. So let's look at these same soil properties in areas that have been impacted by disturbances and see which soil properties are most impacted. And so we are looking at Long Lake and Tantallon. So this is just a picture of the Long Lake site and the different soil types that are there. So we're focusing on specific soil type and forest group and 3 different burn severities to identify these different soil properties and what's happened to them since the fire. We're looking at Tantallon and Long Lake because that's 1 year and 3 years post-fire. So this is kind of an exciting new piece to help us understand what's happening in these forest fire sites and hopefully help us understand what management we can do post-fires within Nova Scotia. We are measuring a few additional things. So there's this thing called hydrophobicity where there's chemical changes in the soil that makes it repellent to water at certain temperatures. So a few additional measurements that we'll be looking at these sites to give us a little bit more details. So overall, the project outcomes will have the beginning of a provincial database for soil health properties within the province and identify the indicators that are most relevant to this area. We will also be producing a State of the Forest Soil Health Report for the province by the end of this project, and then looking at developing management interpretation. So right now we're really at these early stages where we need to collect the baseline data before we can get to that point. But this is all leading into the development of a soil extension program. So we are a few years away, but it's one thing that we definitely want to get people thinking about and whether or not they would find this provincial extension program useful. Similar to what is being used in agriculture, where you go collect a sample, submit it to the lab, and then you get recommendations. The recommendations are obviously going to look quite different. But some of the things that could possibly come out of these recommendations is promoting ecological forest management, enhancing biodiversity, informed species selection and productivity, informed harvest, silviculture management, looking at potential soil impacts such as areas that are prone to erosion or compaction, and then also promoting on a larger scale climate adaptation and enhanced carbon storage. So you see, these are just some of the things that we're hoping to come out of these management interpretations and soil health results. I always kind of say that this project has a few different scales. So there's the direct scale for private woodlot owners, the in-field scale where you can collect soil samples and get that small scale management interpretation, and then also having this larger database of information to help promote climate adaptation and carbon storage for the entire province in forests. So, and this is my last slide, but this is what we would love to hear your opinion about a soil extension program for the province. Like I said, we are a few years off of it being enacted, but we are looking at collaborating with the provincial labs in this project. So even if your woodlot has not been randomly selected, we encourage you to kind of stay in touch with the project, and I do have the information on the next slide. We have a website that is pretty much finished. We do have an Instagram page for those of you who are using it. It's there. There's no posts yet, but it does exist. And then we do have some articles and updates about the projects that come out every couple months. And we'll have some more updates as the field season gets going. And the next slide hopefully will pop up in a second with that information. But again, I really want to thank you all for having me here today. And if you have any questions about soil health in general or about the project, I am super happy to answer them. Thank you.
Questions for Kate?